Group Session 3, Human Needs and the Self. Quote, I've always had this sense that something is missing. It's like a hole or an emptiness. I can't describe it really. End quote. Tom. In this chapter, we will be exploring the impact of childhood trauma with respect to the core human needs that we all share, what can be called universal human needs. And we will look at one of these needs in more detail, the need for a positive or secure sense of self. The discussion will be much more than academic because you will have opportunities to explore your personal experience and development with respect to these ideas. Universal human needs and the effects of complex trauma. In the mid-20th century, a psychologist named Abraham H. Maslow was creating a revolution in our thinking about the connection between universal human needs, psychological problems, and personal development. Up to this point, psychological difficulties had often been seen as an illness, and those who suffered mental illness were in some way quite different from other members of the public. Maslow's view was that human beings didn't fall from the sky last week. We evolved over millions of years, and in particular, we evolved to have needs unique to our species. A flower evolved to need nutrient soil, the right temperature, and the right amount of water and sunshine. If these needs are met, the flower will grow. Maslow believed that all human beings evolved to have 5 core needs, and that meeting these needs was essential if an individual is going to develop in a healthy and flourishing manner. People with mental health problems are seen to be just like everyone else because they have the same core needs. However, their developmental experiences impacted them in such a way that needs, to a greater or lesser extent, didn't get met. Psychological problems can then be seen as an expression of unmet needs. You may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs triangle, depicted below, because it features in pretty much any course in the human sciences, business, art, etc. It's a model with a great deal of explanatory power in many areas, including the experience of historical trauma and personal development. Please pause the audio and look over diagram 1. One of the appealing features of Maslow's model is its simplicity. The first layer of needs to be met are physiological, needs for shelter, food and water and warmth. We then look to have needs for physical and emotional safety met. You must experience basic safety in order to be able to play, form intimate relationships, be creative, or work productively. When I can be reasonably sure I am physically and emotionally safe from harm, my need for love, affection, or belonging arises. When this area of need is met, I can focus on a need for self-esteem, self-worth, self-love, self-expression. Having the need for self-esteem met in a basic way provides a secure place from which I can develop and express my natural abilities to the fullest extent possible. This is self-actualizing. Some people challenge the idea that needs exist in a hierarchy, i.e., that more primary needs must be met before higher needs become important. The idea that core human needs exist is less challenged. Although some people want to argue about how many core needs exist and how to describe them, Maslow's model of universal human needs is not the only way of looking at this area. Perhaps you have a view on these issues. Human beings evolved in such a way that infants and young children are dependent on caregivers for a very long time. This has to do with the fact that we have large brains compared to the rest of the animal kingdom. We have to be born at a period of gestation when our brains are quite underdeveloped. Otherwise, the process of birth would be impossible. A newborn deer can be on its feet within minutes, but it will take us about a year for our brains to coordinate our balance so that we can stagger around. Much of our brain development must take place over many years after we are born. Meanwhile, we are very dependent on our caregivers to meet our needs. But how does Maslow's view of core human needs help us understand the impact of childhood trauma? 1. As an infant and child, you depended on adult caregivers for needs such as safety, love and belonging, positive self-esteem, and self-expression. Abuse, neglect, and abandonment compromise our ability to get these needs met. As a result, those who experienced childhood harm often come into their teen and adult years continuing to feel unsafe, unloved, and struggling with self-esteem or self-expression. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is progressive. This means that lower needs have to be reasonably met before a person feels the confidence to work on getting higher level needs met. For example, if all your energy is going into staying emotionally or physically safe, it's difficult to focus on needs for self-esteem or self-expression. 2. Maslow tells us there is a close connection between unmet core needs and painful psychological symptoms. Later in the guidebook, we will explore common psychological problems of complex trauma, but we need to see that these symptoms are closely tied to unmet needs. Psychological symptoms such as depression and anxiety are important to consider, but they are symptoms, an expression of the problem. If we are going to get closer to the underlying problem, we need to see how your needs didn't get met in childhood and in what way they continue to be unmet today. Some models of therapy can focus almost exclusively on painful psychological symptoms like depression, anxiety, or PTSD. This is important, but it is not adequate for the purposes of this program. Overcoming the effects of childhood trauma is not just about reducing such symptoms. It's about taking control back and developing yourself, relationships, and life so that you can be as free as possible from the effects of past abuse. A feature of this goal is getting your needs met better. We trust that by getting these needs met better, psychological symptoms can be helped as well. If this feels like a big project, we agree. Exercise 1, Exploring Needs. In Chapter 13, you'll have an opportunity to explore your needs in more detail with a view to deciding how you want to develop yourself and your life. For the moment, can you identify with Maslow's point of view? Do you have some sense of the core needs which were unmet for you during childhood? Please pause the audio and do some journaling with Exercise 1. The self and the messages you received. One of the core needs Maslow highlighted was a positive, confident sense of self. As mentioned in Chapter 1, a problem with self-concept is a core diagnostic difficulty for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. See PTSD. So we felt this area deserved further attention. We will look at how the self can develop through the messages a child receives, and we will explore what is known as the adapted self, which can be quite a powerful idea for understanding what went wrong and what recovery might look like. The language we use suggests there is something to this idea of the self. We use words such as self-worth, self-concept, self-image, self-confidence, self-knowledge, and so on. But what is actually meant by the self? The self is not a part of me like the hair on my head or my nose. The self is better thought of as something I experience. The self is experienced typically through the pattern by which I commonly see myself, talk to myself, feel about myself, or experience myself in relation to others. If I look in the mirror and have thoughts and feelings about what I see, this is an experience of the self. If someone criticizes or compliments me, the thoughts or feelings elicited are an expression of the self. Self concept or self image are perhaps useful words to use. We can even talk about a bodily felt sense of self. The sensations I experience through my body also contribute to my sense of self. If I typically have pleasant and calm or unpleasant and agitated body sensations, this too is an experience of who I am. While we are born with a unique biological temperament, we are not born with a self concept. A newborn infant cannot even see themselves as separate from the rest of the world. As we grow up, how we think and feel about ourselves depends on the quality of relationships we have and our experience of the world. As a child, you're exposed to thousands of messages from others, including parents, siblings, other children, and teachers. These messages come through everything said to us, done to us, or in the case of neglect, what we did not receive. Dramatically different messages are illustrated below. A 5-year-old draws a picture of the family cat and shows it to a parent. 1. The child's parent looks carefully at the drawing and responds, "Wow, that's a really good drawing." 2. The child the child's parent scowls and responds irritably, "That doesn't look anything like a cat." 3. The parent tunes out the child and carries on drinking and watching TV. A 5-year-old spills a glass of juice over the kitchen table and appears surprised and upset. 1. The parent says it was an accident and then teaches the child how to clean up and properly hold a glass. 2. The child's parent responds in anger, "You useless," add harsh expletive here, "moron." A 5-year-old has not had enough experience of others or the world to have a well-defined sense of self. They will absorb the above messages from their parent in a manner which informs their sense of self. In the first example, child drawing a cat, the message received will be, "I'm a good artist," "I'm a lousy artist," or "my drawings aren't worth looking at." In the second example, spilled juice, the message received will be, "It's okay to make mistakes because you can learn from them," or "I'm a useless expletive moron." If messages such as these are repeated on hundreds or thousands of occasions, the child will almost certainly come to develop ways of thinking and feeling about themselves which are consistent with the messages. And the messages we hear are not just ideas or images I absorb. They also come with emotions attached and remembered. "I am good at drawing" comes with pleasant feelings of confidence. "I am a useless moron" comes with feelings of shame or fear. Clinicians have a fancy term for explaining this phenomenon. We say that a child introjects the messages they hear. It's a simple idea, actually. All it means is that if I hear a message like "you are useless" often enough, I come to absorb it. I absorb or introject the message and associated feelings into my sense of self. Years later, if I make a mistake, even a small one, I may feel quite angry at myself or ashamed, and I will see or talk to myself in terms of being useless. The people who sent these hurtful messages years ago might not be around anymore. They don't need to be. Those messages have become a part of who I am, and I can see myself and talk to myself in ways consistent with the hurtful messages I heard many years ago. My experience of abuse or neglect is kept alive through how I typically think and feel about myself today. What was said to me as a child is not the only way I can receive messages from others. The experience of being physically abused, sexually abused, or neglected can also send messages. For example, physical abuse tends to impart the message that you are bad or you are the sort of person who deserves to be hit. Emotional neglect or being ignored sends a message like, you are not worth spending time with. As we will explore in a later chapter, people who are abused or neglected in childhood are more likely to be abused or neglected within adult relationships, something called re traumatization. This makes sense. If I absorb the idea that I am bad and I am the sort of person who deserves to be hit, I am more likely to accept being in an adult relationship with someone who induces bad feelings or hits me. Some may have experienced severe and sustained abuse through multiple childhood relationships, so they will have received very few positive messages to counteract the abusive ones. However, others will have received mixed messages, many harmful to their developing self image, but others which were supportive. There may have been an abusive person you encountered, but this was counterbalanced by someone who supported your sense of self. Our developing sense of self is often not simple in this respect. Samuel, an individual who experienced severe emotional neglect, expressed this issue well. Quote, I was the black sheep of the family. Everyone either ignored me or shouted at me, but in year 5 there was this teacher who liked me and really encouraged me. That meant a lot. End quote. Exercise 2. Exploring the messages you received. Please pause the audio and complete exercise 2. Completing the above exercise will hopefully help clarify which sorts of harmful messages were most pronounced for you during childhood. Let's see if we can take this a step further and consider how these messages got introjected. In other words, have you absorbed these messages into your sense of self? Are the messages you received in childhood still alive through your daily experience? Do you continue to relate to yourself in ways which are consistent with the harmful treatment you experienced as a child? To help you explore this, let's consider Alan. Alan was a 40-year-old man who experienced emotional and physical abuse from his father and did not get protected by his mother, a woman with serious mental health issues. Remarkably, Alan completed university and became manager of an IT department that looked after the computer systems of a large organization. Recently, Alan made a few relatively minor mistakes at work and had become so distraught that he had taken sick leave, convinced that he was incapable of doing his job. To keep busy at home, he had drilled a hole in a ceiling for a new light, and the hole had been too large. Quote, so now I've got this hole in my ceiling and I can't even put the light in. I'm just useless. If I can't even drill a hole, that's the right size, how in the world can I manage a department? Seriously, I feel like a waste of space. End quote. I'm just useless. I feel like a waste of space. For Alan, this language will feel very much like his own words, but these words clearly reflect the abusive messages imparted to him by his father throughout childhood. The highly punitive way Alan punishes himself for minor mistakes today expresses all the harmful messages he experienced in childhood. Alan had introjected these messages, and they have become a part of his self concept. Your experience won't be quite the same as Alan's, but perhaps you can identify with Alan in a manner which helps you explore the messages you received in childhood and how these messages are still kept alive for you today. Below, you have an opportunity to summarize in your own words what you think are the most problematic messages you received. Reviewing where you placed X's on the lines above may help. Also, can you continue to talk to yourself today in ways which reflect the experiences of harm you experienced in childhood? Please pause the audio and continue journaling on this topic in the space you will find in the guidebook. The adapted self. We will explain what the adapted self means in a moment, but let's begin by clarifying what a child needs as they are developing. What a child needs reflects Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but let's put it in terms specific to child development. A child needs to receive 1. Care for basic needs, feeding, warmth, sleep. 2. Physical and emotional safety. 3. Affection, acceptance, and a sense of belonging. And 4. Recognition. I see and value you. For these needs to be met, there needs to be at least one adult who is emotionally attuned to the child, i.e., can correctly understand and respond to the child's needs in an enduring manner. Emotional attunement is critical in every respect because it underlines an adult's ability to respond to any of the child's needs. To understand the adapted self, we need to appreciate that the needs indicated above are so important that a child will do pretty much anything to try and get them met. If necessary, a child will adjust their behavior, bury or ignore their feelings, or pretend to be something they are not. If a child experiences abuse, neglect, or abandonment, they will adapt their emotions and behaviors to try and get safety, affection, or love, or a sense of belonging or recognition. So, the adapted self is who the child becomes to try to get these needs met. If a child has to adapt their emotions and behaviors on a regular basis, these emotions and behaviors begin to seem normal or just who you are. Because children are small and vulnerable, they tend to be very sensitive to the expectations or demands of carers. Of course, any caring parent will set healthy boundaries and expectations for their child, such as regular bedtimes, brushing teeth, or keeping things tidy. However, children need to grow up in circumstances where they are confident they will be safe, loved, and valued no matter what. Unfortunately, in circumstances of abuse or neglect, children frequently experience what have been called conditions of worth. Conditions of worth are conditions a child imagines they must meet to gain others' acceptance, inclusion, or approval. Sometimes it's not just conditions of worth, it's conditions of safety. Tom never knew his father and experienced neglect and emotional abuse from his mother. When he came out as a gay man in his teens, he experienced bullying and rejection, exacerbating his earlier experiences. He often seemed emotionally numb and barely able to describe what he was feeling. Quote, "It just wasn't a good idea to have emotions when I was little. My mom would get pissed off or ignore me if I was upset or scared. It's like I just wasn't supposed to ever get upset or need anything." End quote. Tom was experiencing conditions of worth such as don't have or express emotions and don't be needy. Children like Tom will adapt to circumstances of neglect and abuse by learning to ignore or suppress their emotions, or by not asking for anything. Recall how we said that the self is the pattern of how I learn to think about or see myself. In order to adapt to circumstances of neglect and abuse, Tom was learning to see himself as someone who should not express emotions or needs. This is exactly what the adapted self means. It's the self you become as you try to adapt to abuse, neglect, or conditions of worth. As mentioned, if you spend much of your childhood adapting to difficult situations, the adapted self just begins to feel like the person you are. The adapted self becomes how you typically feel, think, or behave, and it can seem normal. Exercise 3: Conditions of worth or safety. Basis for the adapted self. Please pause the audio and complete exercise 3. So, the adapted self is who a person becomes as a response to conditions of worth or safety. Many years later, these ideas can exist as a deeply ingrained part of a person's sense of self. Here's the big problem. As this adapted self develops, you will need to deny very real parts of yourself. We mentioned Tom a moment ago. As a response to emotional abuse and neglect, Tom's adapted self includes ideas such as don't express emotions like anger and don't ask for help. So, Tom learned to deny or ignore feelings like anger, and he is in the habit of never letting others see when he needs help. Psychologists sometimes say Tom has split off these feelings or needs. When a child has to deny or split off parts of who they really are, they live in a state of contradiction. They have feelings and needs that they imagine are not safe to experience or express. So, these feelings and needs have to be buried or ignored. Tom came to therapy because his wife was threatening to leave him, and he was distraught. His wife was frustrated with him because he was so closed off, distant, and depressed. This makes sense. Tom's adapted self required not allowing himself to have feelings like anger or to ask for help. At 35, the adapted self is still operating, but now it is a real problem for his marriage and happiness. The adapted self can take many forms depending on what characteristics had to be denied in order to get some safety or recognition. Juliet's mother was a heroin addict who provided little care for Juliet or her two younger siblings. Juliet told us, quote, I had to dress my younger brother and sister and get us food from around the house a lot. I was changing diapers from the age of 6. It was just normal, I guess. It was like this role I had. End quote. Don't think about yourself and serve others was a condition of worth and safety for Juliet. It gave her a role, but she had to deny the part of herself that can be assertive or receive care. As an adult, she is submissive, unable to express herself, depressed, and has relied on eating disordered behavior for many years. John was physically and emotionally abused by an alcoholic father. His father modeled and taught aggression, and John got the idea that if he was going to receive any respect, attention, or affection, he would need to be a fighter. Quote, I was often in trouble for fighting, and I got thrown out of school at 15. The odd thing is, I'm not really an aggressive person. I mean, I don't really want to hurt people. I don't even like conflict, really. End quote. When we knew John, he was largely illiterate and was learning to read and write through adult education. He'd done time in prison a few times for theft. He had plenty of acquaintances, but no close relationships. Conditions of worth or safety for John were: you better fight and dominate people if you want respect or importance. John became a fighter, but he denied or split off the sensitive and caring parts of himself and a willingness to be vulnerable in relationships. Children often deny or split off parts of themselves because the alternative would mean losing a relationship to the person who is supposed to care for you, the person you are meant to bond with. Vanderkolk captures this idea vividly. Quote, "For many children, it is safer to hate themselves than to risk their relationship to their caregivers by expressing anger or running away. They survive by denying, ignoring, and splitting off large chunks of reality. They forget the abuse. They suppress their rage or despair. They numb their physical sensations. If you were abused as a child, you are likely to have a childlike part living inside you that is frozen in time, still holding fast to this kind of self-loathing and denial." End quote. In a moment, we are going to consider the unadapted self, or those aspects of you that might have developed if you had felt safe and cared for. But before we move on, an important point needs to be made. It's not correct to simply say that the adapted self is bad or unhealthy, and the unadapted self is good. It's not this black and white. We need to keep in mind that the adapted self developed in order to protect the child, to allow the child to try and get some limited needs met for emotional and physical safety, love, recognition, and a sense of belonging. The remnants of the adapted self, which developed in childhood, will still be a part of who you are today. The adapted self may cause you worry or stress and prevent you from getting certain needs met, but there can also be positive aspects. Maggie is a hairdresser who experienced emotional abuse from both parents, and a feature of her adapted self is that she is extremely sensitive to others. Quote, "When I am cutting hair, I am totally focused on my customer, and I want it to be just right for them. I worry a lot, and if there is even a hint of unhappiness, I can feel really upset, and sometimes I won't sleep. It's stressful, but I'm really good at what I do, and I've got loads of customers who won't let anyone else touch their hair." End quote. Recovery for Maggie will need to involve seeing how the adapted self undermines her need for safety and self-esteem. However, qualities such as sensitivity and care were also a product of her childhood experiences. She won't lose these qualities. They are too much a part of who she is. So, while it's necessary to work on the unhelpful remnants of the adapted self, which are alive today, it's also important to respect and honor those positive aspects of the adapted self that made you who you are today. When speaking with people who experienced childhood harm, it's common for them to spontaneously say such things as, "I feel like I don't know who I am," or "I feel like I'm trying to find myself." In the context of our discussion, these statements take on a particular meaning. If a person spends much of their childhood adapting to abuse or neglect, they became something they have to be in order to try and get some safety or recognition, the adapted self. But who are they really? Who are they when they can let go of the defensiveness? Who might they be if they could reclaim the parts of themselves they had to deny or bury? As adults, reclaiming lost parts of yourself is a way of understanding who you really are. Everyone who encounters adverse childhood experiences is unique, so who they are underneath the adapted self will also be unique. However, it's possible to consider what can be called the unadapted self. An individual's personality comprises all the patterns by which they typically think, feel, and behave in relation to themselves and others. Personality will always be the result of the unique biological temperament you were born with, nature, and your experiences, especially relationship experiences, nurture. Most parents with two or more children intuitively understand what biological temperament is. They know that aspects of their children's personality were baked in at birth. In other words, aspects of their child's personality are simply the product of biological temperament. Aspects of biological temperament can include qualities such as how sensitive, how cautious or adventurous, or how introverted or social a person is. We can understand the unadapted self in the following way. Let's say that throughout childhood there was at least one person who had been consistently attuned to your emotions and needs, and then provided dependable care, affection, and protection from harm. If we combine these experiences of nurture with the biological temperament you were born with, we can perhaps get some inkling of the unadapted self. Put simply, the unadapted self is who a person becomes when they do not have to adapt to significant childhood experiences of threat or conditions of worth. If you find the term unadapted self a bit cold, you can use terms like your natural or original self. But what is your unadapted self? As mentioned above, the unadapted self will be unique because you are a unique individual. However, there are certain general features of the unadapted self which are more likely for those who received enduring care and protection in childhood. These include having access to feelings, body sensations, and needs. You may have experienced conditions of worth or safety, such as if you want to be safe or accepted, you had better focus on the needs of others. Accessing or developing the unadapted self often means being able to attend to all of your emotions, including anger, fear, and sadness. It means being able to pay attention to body sensations and being able to access your core needs. Self expression, agency, and industry. Conditions of worth, such as be quiet, don't talk, don't act spontaneously, etc., can crush self expression and self confidence. Accessing the unadapted self can mean developing self confidence, self expression, finding your voice, and getting hold of a stronger sense of self agency. It might not have been safe as a child to be playful, spontaneous, or creative, so these characteristics may need to be discovered or developed. Intimacy and self protection. If a child lives with threatening circumstances, they learn that getting close to people is dangerous, so the adapted self keeps people at a distance or may be aggressive or resistant. It can mean never allowing yourself to be trusting or vulnerable, leading to isolation and loneliness. The unadapted self does include protecting yourself when necessary, but also means allowing yourself to be open and vulnerable with the right people so that you can experience intimacy. It means learning when to put your guard up and when it's safe to lower it. Capacity for self compassion and self care. If conditions of worth or safety include ideas such as think about and care for others, ignore your own needs, etc., a person's capacity for self compassion and self care can get compromised. Accessing or developing the unadapted self can mean developing skills for self compassion and self care. This is certainly easier said than done, And there's a whole chapter on this area later on. Exercise 4. Getting a sense of your unadapted self. Please pause the audio and complete exercise 4.